I like your.
Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nightlight. My name is Tom Snarski, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our 28th Nightlight poetry reading event. It's a unique honor to welcome this magnificent group of poets that we have reading for us this evening. Danniel Schoonebeek, Allyson Paty, and Anna Moschovakis are all here, and I'm so excited to hear their work in just a brief moment. In case you haven't listened in before, Nightlight is a reading series featuring poets and writers in a monthly Zoom, usually on the third Thursday of the month at about 9 p.m. Eastern. This month and next month are no exception. We're also on social media at Nightlight Poems on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and Instagram with some underscores, night underscore, light underscore, poems underscore, where usernames are a little bit harder to come by. The bots get there first, usually. We love to hype our readings out there, and we also love to post our readings on YouTube, where we have a channel of all our past events. So if you're joining us from the future, listening in there, thanks for still being alive and well and listening to poetry. That's awesome. So yeah, without any further ado, so glad that everyone is here. I'm really excited to get into our readings and readers this evening, and I'm very excited to get things rolling by introducing our first reader, who also deserves credit for basically organizing this reading because I got in touch and Danniel decided like, oh, we got some folks who are going to read some amazing poems. So thank you and welcome to Danniel Schoonebeek. Danniel Schoonebeek is the author of American Barricade from Yes Yes Books in 2014 and Trebuchet, a 2015 National Poetry Series selection for the University of Georgia Press in 2016. A recipient of a 2019 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and a 2015 Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship from Poetry Foundation, recent work appears in Poetry, The New Yorker, American Poetry Review, and elsewhere, and now Nightlight as well. So thank you, Danniel, for being here. So excited to hear what you're going to share. Floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here, and thank you to Anna and Allison. Put a gun to their head to be here, and they obliged. And hello to friends and everybody listening. Um, I was told that quote unquote new shit is encouraged, and lucky for you, I am reading entirely new poems from a manuscript that I'm just about done with that I don't think anybody's really ever heard before. Yeah, the manuscript is called Jeremiah Nights, and it begins with an epigraph from a poet named Leo Marx, who is probably not super well known to people. Um, his poems, along with fragments of poems by Verlaine, were used during the First World War to disguise communiques between the Allies. And he wrote this very brief poem on Christmas Eve in 1943 in memory of his girlfriend. The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have for the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. And the manuscript begins with a kind of untitled sort of incantation poem. It's all in italics and right margined for people who get off on that sort of thing. Neither old nor young anymore, he was an otherwise unplaceable man, living alone among earwigs and debt, which is not to forget empties, this word anhedonia, the tremens, all of this untold nights into the late world affliction. In the mornings, worshipping neither the sun nor the search engine, everyone hated the names. To speak such wrongly lettered words into existence, one felt this undone, tick-bit embarrassment on behalf of language itself. The problem was the heavy, wronged in the torrent he pirated for nothing, couldn't for the life of him quit questioning his captive. Dead is what happens when you don't give me a name. Give me a name or it's grindstone, he said. Whether allies, neighbors, loved ones, antagonists, dead is what happens when you don't give me a name's not a question, and to a person, everyone hated the names. Believe him the night a low wind across the mouth of an empty whistled a torch song he knew once by heart was the night he named it the late world affliction. And for a time it was a life as inevitable as a name. A drink in the morning, the late world affliction, an initial pressed into wax, a gunshot in daylight, moths in the linens, a peach in the sun at night. You say you've heard the pale stone fruit grow behind the paywall in the untold night. Nights you've heard them stitching their families. Nights you can hear them make. And like each mealy thread that surrounds a stone fruit lives a life unto itself, so too the people who lived in his bent underlife city threaded their lives one by one around the life. If you asked him, he'd say he was dying to live. In the commons, like a strife trough, the late world affliction, but the bullhorn was true. The out-of-work baker, dying of divorce one address away, left a jar of heirloom pickles brining on the sill. A woman in houndstooth slacks appeared at his door with a bottle-brush terrier and asked if she could sleep in the room in the untold night where he dreamt of the money he'd spend in the next life. The tower struck 12 on the face of a disfigured statue, his empties filled up with snow. Even the bill collectors, the men made broke, as they are known among earwigs, papered his door with a summons and refused to depart while he stood blank and red in the kitchen, learning to shake hands with his knife. How is it days of untold nights loom past for years is a question you'll no longer need ask. And before too long, behind any paywall, you can hear their lives, the threads of the stone fruit, withdraw like meat from their pit. And so too, one by one, the people who threaded his life began to withdraw from his life. Whether out of heart sickness, terror, wanderlust, triumph, or death, each by each, the strings were pulled from the loom. And henceforth, the poems have titles. This one is called Jaws of Life. Jaws of life, I wonder who's worse tonight, me or the backwater where I was born. It's only a shanty in an old shanty town, but there's never not one bloodshot state trooper's daughter, naked but for a pillory of broken down wine boxes, dying up there of her own personality. Whoever the opposite of homesickness is, it's never not the state trooper's daughter descending a fire escape. You know, and bouquets the village with her smells. It's stitchless night, it's whispering pines, and now every time you hear a last-ditch Silverado bottom out on a turnpike pothole, tradition states you taste her name like exhaust, but you can't. They ever tell you the one where so-and-so was born in the birthplace of suicide doors? But memory is blacktop, and all the carjacked trucks ghost ride here for the night, if only to shake a few years of body rot off the undercarriage. They say it's 5 leaves left before the flagstones are goners. Then summer will be the summer when. Untold summer when 5 brothers hitched home, out a few years of skin after all-night hold'em in the Scotch dark bonfire smoke. I take no pleasure in saying this. Years I thought they would poison the reservoir. My shitless brothers with cicadas instead of ideas. You of all people ought to know it's one hooked letter and nothing else. Nothing else hangs between the annals of laughter and slaughter, they thundered. If ever there was a devil born without horns, it's never not one of them dying of thirst, dying of his own conspiracies, holed up in the shanty, in the old shanty town, where the state trooper's dispatcher loaded for bear and buckshotted himself until his cavities were inseparable from night. They say savagery is too small a word when none but your enemy's piss is discharged from the tap. They say there are no stars tonight but those of enmity, and hardly a trace of our undoing, us 5 bloodshot locals, torching for the jaws of life in the cigarette trees. Inseparable will be forever when we're fired, my friends. Discharged down the reckoning line like a white clay rabbit, and traced across the backwater by untold crosshairs. This next poem has an epigraph from a biographical note on the life of Matsuo Basho. Persona non grata. Then he shut the gate to his hut and refused to see anybody. And yet home once again in his dead-toothed, newfangled village, someone else named Delhi. When your children make children in my empire of maples, our H won't be silent when they speak the name town drunk Erastus Root claimed, swinging blackout circa 1821 from his neck, from his copper plate weather vane. It's high noon in the Imperium, an age when there is nothing empowering about being an American. Yes, even in Delhi, every day is Black Friday, and waiting for the fire siren to announce our next fire sale. Even in Delhi, you're waiting for Delhi. All these poems are kind of, they're not really dedicated to anyone, but they're kind of for people, which is usually comes at the end. And I haven't really been reading them, but perhaps some of you know the work of the poet Chris Schlegel. He has a new book out called Blackbird that I think is excellent. And this poem is for Chris Schlegel. Ravish Road. Tonight's so silent here, this last night of April. I swear you can smell the grosbeak, oily and asleep in his locust. What a burden of red his neckerchief holds. I'll forget to write once in my leisure. And never once more they'll begin again at last. The days I'm least a person, the days I'm past myself. Honey locust, under you I lived for a time in my bloom. Tonight, say so long to life. You were nursed upon this selfsame hill, fed by one gutter, while away ate the sea. While away I sang like some gross failing homeward. What sad embroidery you wore for me, honey. What a burden of red. How long to the sea. Tonight it's asleep in the black locust, the grosbeak and me, our best dying's undone. I read this poem last night, so I suppose it's not officially the first time it's being read. And when I read it last night, I took a moment to say that about once every 15 years, I write a poem that makes one person laugh. And my girlfriend thought this poem was funny, and it's sort of based on a joke that her uncle told to me in a cabin in Minnesota. Talking dog. This guy cracks the Wanad Digest. There it is. Talking dog, $10, no questions asked. Why so low? The guy asks the dog, the two of them finally alone in the orchard. I speak in your voice, says the dog. FBI hired me 1 year and change out of Quantico. Job was man and commandeer, no evac black sites, ill and numerous, let's say lousy with unsavories. This is embedded every day like cork, zero alias, deep inside the Gulf. Now I'm scrubbed. Your man runs lead via pirate radio on false flag agitprop performance art operations staged explicitly in order to cultivate and record raw dark web oppo research for whichever client pays me that day, and whose name, I should say, like my own, is nowhere on this. Also, today is my birthday. I'm 7 years old. That dog say anything else? The guy asks the owner, the two of them finally alone in the anteroom. Ad stated, no questions asked, money's mine. And besides, the owner tells the guy, takes the 10. That talking dog has never spent a day outside the orchard in his life. And by request, I will close by reading a poem by a fourth grader from Muddy Brook Elementary School called Egg Skin. All grammatical errors are his. Egg skin. I ate a egg for breakfast. It was delicious. I loved it. It was special, and I devoured it. Thank you.
What a mic drop. That was beautiful. What? And I devoured it. The tiger is out. Yes,
It's
that
like
was
a William Carlos Williams poem, but he's never read that poem. Yeah.
that's beautiful. That's the constructivism of parallel discovery right there in the flesh. And
Yeah.
and the voice, the vessel for that poem that you just heard was Danniel Schoonebeek, who you can find on Instagram at Schoonebeek, Schoonebeek. And also you can keep tabs on Daniel's work at danielschoonebeek.com and keep an ear to the ground for that new manuscript and its bright future. Remind us, Jeremiah Nights?
Well, Jeremiah Nights.
Jeremiah Nights.
Yeah. It's like I tried to make it sound like a cool tropical party.
Nice. And the agents are salivating. I can feel them salivating at the sound of the Jeremiah Nights and the tropical, etc. Awesome stuff, Daniel, in the chat from Stephen, and I couldn't agree more. That's a beautiful way to get things started, and I'm so happy to keep things rolling by introducing our second reader of the evening in Allyson Paty. And Allyson Paty is the author keeping our Francophilic titles alive, title run alive with of Jalousie, which is the winner of the 2023 Berkshire Prize and published by Tupelo Press in 2025. She co-edits Singing Saw Press and works at NYU Gallatin and the NYU Prison Education Program. So thank you, Allyson, so much for being here. I'm really excited to hear what you're going to read.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks everyone for being here. It's really nice to see you all. Daniel, it makes me so happy to hear you read your poems and also Eggskin. Um, Thank you for that. In keeping with the theme, I'm also going to read a poem that's not brand new, but I've never read, it's long. I'm going to read one long poem. And I've never read it before. So it is new in that way. And in it, there are a few works of art. Most kind of centrally is Namjoon Paik's 1962 performance, Zen for Head, or even more specifically, this particular photograph depicting a moment near the end of that performance. Um, so this poem is called Wavy. I'm thinking of a line, not the ragged stripe when Namjoon Pike dipped his head in ink and tomato juice and crawled backward over paper scroll, but something like the line from the score to the live act, to the mark composed, to the photo I've seen of Pike face down in a light suit, thick dark path before him. I'm thinking of the line by which Zen for head is each of these things, and not quite any. This state of being and not being across event, object, document. A line to hold this work in proximity to others, overlapping but not congruent with lived ties, say friendship, rivalry, love, while by the ink Pike joined at once and in jest the distant lineages of action painting and the calligraphic brushstroke. Next to this, I'm holding a line from a feudal era play Mike and I saw last week in Kyoto. On a beach cutting reeds in poverty-induced exile, the estranged husband says he envies the waves because they return from where they came. I raise my eyes from the device where English subtitles are running to the stage where, in a clean arc, the performer lifts his silk-draped arm to meet the downward angle of his gaze, to Mike's face, trained on this pose, which for 600 years has meant tears, or more specifically, Shiorimigi, weeping with the left arm. A surge of tender feeling carries me toward him, and I think, Why not? Why can't love's tide set me down in the place from where it came? The performer's movements, however slow and precise, vanish as they are made. Each is only and exactly itself, yet arises from training undertaken in childhood, the vocation strictly patrilineal, the vocabulary codified and renewed through each articulation, stretching back to open fields in the early 15th century. The performer's arm is lowered now. I glance at Mike, who first brought me to the pleasure, slow and precise, of watching no, feeling fully the constraints on what we can grasp. Out of a wish to understand, I have tried to draw a straight line back to when we met and to follow the generative force of love through our lives. The person next to me at once exceeds and cannot contain the years between us, that shared time lost in arriving in an open present, where right now the reed flute's wavering note travels out high over our heads. When we met, I had no openness to any element of prescribed meaning in art, especially dance. Being young and American enough to think a body in place could be only and exactly what it does right there and then, and to think of turning from the preordained as a choice related to freedom. Of course, I understood my preferences did not come from nowhere, but tracked backward to a series of breaks with received tradition, which in breaking built a changed tradition. One I received informally by coming after, in a city that had been one locus of building and breaking, and formally via my teacher, who on the first day of class in a wood-floored studio on Great Jones Street in January 2007, gave to her students Lamont Young's composition 1960 number 10 to Bob Morris. Draw a straight line and follow it. And after each of us shared our own straight lines drawn and followed, my teacher opened a book in which was printed the black and white image of Pike face down, thick, dark path before him. A few years later, I met Mike. He introduced me to his teacher who'd moved to New York with Young, left in part to escape him. She kindly asked me about my poems, which were scores meant to be enacted only by reading. When I traced a debt to artists working in that time and place through which she'd passed, she said it was funny that I should speak of it as a movement. To my mind, Young's score, however simple, is impossible. Every interpretation, including Pike's, does the inverse, follows a straight line and draws it. In the difference, if there is one, a question about fate. Yes, just the kind of grand humanist theme from which artists of the time were turning, I know, but I couldn't and can't work it out, so it sticks. Back home, in bed in New York, I wake at 4 a.m, Japan time inside me, Young's score in my head. Mike's breath loops, casts a line toward morning. I just listen, possessed by the thought that in simple repetition, an act can become its opposite. That this is the basic fact of being in time if you are mortal. Accumulation equals obliteration. But is this also the basic fact of any and every act, say, love? I mean, the generative force of what brought us here, this line I keep trying to follow in order to draw. When I can't stand it, I get up and run. The gridded streets, the park path, I'm thinking of a line that goes and does not end, but insists, and by nothing but its own insisting becomes all that it is. A line that in becoming becomes inevitable. Sunrise through the trees, early June. Surely infiniteness is the most evident thing in the world, a line from Oppen. I'm thinking of a line that pulls from the shore, a line that goes forever toward and away. Later that morning, I'm headed to work on Metro North. I cut straight along the Hudson toward a classroom inside a prison, my head against the window, vistas of the carceral state, glinting river, stone, concrete, everywhere green, at the edge of my vision. I am thinking about Mike, our shared time, and all that's his alone from before and elsewhere, what it really takes to hold the full reach of those lines and still see him only and exactly as he is. In my phone's browser, I type Pike Zen for Head 1962. Tiny similar images run down the screen. I click into a video, 42 seconds in discontinuous clips. Pike makes handprints, dribbles ink from his necktie, dips his hair in the bowl. He is clownish. The audience howls. From the photo in my teacher's book, I recognize Pike's suit, the floorboards, the radiator, some kind of electrical box, the ink mix in the white bowl. No question, the film clips come from the same room. These are the moments leading up to the photo of Pike face down before his line, a pose and trail from which I always imagined Pike dragging himself back in one solemn, if preposterous, motion. That photograph, the prostrate body, the thick dark path extending from his head, the sole evidence by which I'd known Pike's performance. No, I know he's not depicting death, but exhaustion so pervades my sense of the scene. The mirth, as heard in the film clips, is a sound that slaps me with several obvious lessons. For example, even in the case of a straight line, having seen the end doesn't mean you know the middle, the beginning. Between event and document, the constraint of how much one can take from the other into itself, not so much a condition of being incomplete as a question of how each bit speaks for itself when speaking of the other even faithfully. 4 hours after leaving my apartment, I arrive at the seminar table. The distances of the carceral state are lines carried in my body, carried differently by the students coming now to sit. For years, I thought this work was not mine to describe. And though I still agree, I think now it's important not to hide how common it is for a university to extend a piece of itself into a prison, the geography of the carceral state being the geography of daily life here in America. So when the simple arc of time as a mortal pounds through my head, if it is universal that to accumulate is to obliterate, it is drastically uneven, say for me, and for a person detained here in this building, its literal walls, its other strictures, and held to a moment in his life, sometimes distant, a sentence, a straight line, if ever there was one. One could think, it occurs to me now, the blank scroll is the line, and Pike's motions the following. I picture someone, maybe Pike, maybe not, rolling the paper parallel to the wall, out onto the floor, the scroll having traveled on labor's movements, across warehouse, factory, timber yards, roads, the upward growth of trees, drawing and following, ever only more difficult to parse. I'm thinking of a line capped with arrows and another of the same length capped with dots. The math teacher drew them in blue dry erase to remind us, his ninth grade class, a line segment departs and arrives from 2 points articulated in space, whereas a line travels out in both directions without end. At night, on my fingers, the smell of soap in the bathroom past the guard desk. When I catch it, I smell not the prison in Ulster County, but the grade school on East 66th Street, where 25, 30 years ago must have been this exact liquid, a line that recedes and rushes in. In my jeans is the week-old smell of a Tokyo downpour, the rainwater now emptied into the Pacific, and here in the fabric starting to mildew. I have to wash them, I know, however much I want to just gather these lines and hold them. The no play ends happily. The wife, estranged for 3 years, has now found work. She takes her husband from his poverty-induced exile back to their home in Kyoto. Incessantly, the play quotes poems to describe the unseen scenery. the characters' outward circumstances and inner lives, the force of time through each. One of the final texts the husband speaks comes from an imperial court 1,000 years before the play. In Naniwa Harbor bloom the flowers that were asleep all winter. Now it is spring, announce the flowers filling the trees. It's by reciting to each other that the husband and wife end their separation and reconcile. Presumably, the original audience of 15th century noblemen would have known and recognized the quoted lines as works of art inside the work of art unfolding before them. But I, as a person from the 20th and 21st centuries, and moreover an American, do not. The ancient ephemeral traveling through the play appears single to me, the plum blossoms' fragrance deeply scenting even my sleeves, however weak the approximation. The grain of my life feels particular and mine, though it's carried, I know, on rough, simple strokes, stretching back and repeated until worn into grooves that at once enable and restrain. Lines traveled, however, unevenly by almost everyone. It's not the text, but the mix of shame and awe and thanks I get when the husband says he will depend on another's words to express what he feels for himself anew, and then he begins to dance. Thank you.
Hey.
Holy Mother of God. That was wild. Thank you, Allyson, for that incredible tour de force. Just an astonishingly, yeah, Nanjun Pig is in the house, and that was something. Holy moly. That again was Allyson Paty, who you can find throughout the world, but specifically you can find Jalousie, which is again the winner of the 2023 Berkshire Prize and published by Tupelo Press in 2025. Keep an eye out for that and for the work that Singing Saw Press is putting out. And I hope that that poem, I don't hope it's not a misnomer, but I hope that piece has a bright and brilliant and in print sometime not too distantly in the future, because I want to read it again. That was marvelous. Thank you so much.
Yes, it was.
It was, right?
That's my
Yeah.
mom.
And there's no better imprimatur to ask for in internet poetry than mom's imprimatur. Thank you for being here, Sheree.
Yeah.
Wow. This brings us to our third act, which is a really beautiful third act and a very exciting one. I'm really excited to close us out to introduce Anna Moschovakis. And Anna Moschovakis is a writer, translator, and performer. Her most recent book is An Earthquake is a Shaking of the Surface of the Earth, an unhinged novel about shadow selves, cults, and method acting. Anna lives in the Catskill Mountains and at the edge of the Mojave Desert. More at badutopian.com, and even more happening right now. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And wow, those were both incredible, incredible readings to hear. So thanks to both of you and to everyone for being here. And I too am going to read something new and actually unfinished, but I write very slowly. So I've been working on this poem for like 5 years. It's a long poem and I'm reading I think it's the last part, but it's the last part minus the very last part of the last part. So it'll end before the very last part, the last part. The full poem is called Preliminary Notes on Risk. And I'll just start to read the beginning of the end of the poem about risk. For Chris and for Cole, for Joshua, Stefan, HJ, Donna, and Abe. A poem titled My Apologies, a list poem with all the iterations laid out. How I'm sorry, how I apologize, how I regret, how I take responsibility, full responsibility for, how I take partial, how I wish I hadn't, how I wish I had never, how if only it never, how if only it hadn't, if only it just, how if just it had not occurred. 1, to do. Look at the genre apology poem, apologia, apologia, yamas, a drink to our health. Look up the apology step, how it works, what it's for, where precisely it falls in the 12. But first, to discard right away the insincere apology, cynical apology, the strategic or instrumental apology, transactional apology, sorry, not sorry apology, the lie. We have enough trouble with the genuine ones. We have enough problems already. 2. If I had known, if I had understood my brain, my nervous system, my neurotype, my neurodivergence, if I'd clocked my patterns, my parenting, my parents, my programming, if somehow I had made sense of my constructions, my compulsions sooner, then perhaps. 3. I know, as you know, that nobody's perfect. You know, as I know, that I am not perfect. We know we're not perfect. Does this mean we shouldn't forgive one another? That we should? How to know when to forgive one another, or when it's okay, or when it's required to refuse? What's the problem, after all, with a universe in which the desirability of forgiving one another is taken for a given? Is it a given? What universe is this? Repair sounds good, but has fallen under legitimate suspicion of late. I am paying attention. My nervous system responds to legitimate suspicion. Unfortunately, it also responds to the illegitimate kind. If the question is, when is pressure on the notion of repair a required or defensible pressure, how can you, let alone your nervous system, know? 4. All else being equal, isn't it nicer to repair, or to attempt or partially attempt repair? But what is partial repair? When is it legitimate? Forget legitimate. When is it safe? Partial repair, definitely not safe when it comes to the airplane's engine, definitely safe when it comes to the teacup broken by accident during a passionate kiss. Unfortunately, most cases fall between. 5. Another question. What is an individual? It seems obvious that it's more tempting to try, more tempting to attempt repair with an individual, to apologize to or receive an apology from an individual, than it is tempting to repair with or expect repair from a corporation, an institution, a state, a system, an army, a position, a policy, a God. From your nerves, synapses, or from that feeling in the gut, the weather, and yet from another perspective, does this distinction even hold? What I'm trying to say is, does forgiveness occur in the subject or in the object, in the forgiver or in the forgiven? If you have thoughts on the matter, please share. 6. Earlier, we mentioned the insincere apology. We dismissed the lie, but of course, this begs a question. Doubt creeps. There are things you know, willingly or not, consciously or not. So how to mitigate this instability, lack of clarity? What can be brought to bear? What about Kant categorical imperatives? What of the status, of the apologizer's intent? Or through a more experiential lens, what about when an apology starts out right and then something riddle, what starts out right but ends wrong every time? 7. The day I began this section of this poem was a week after a friend had died abruptly, much too young, leaving a husband, bereaved, a world, work, friends. I'd been replying to email I'd neglected for months. Most of the replies began with an apology. I said yes to appearing at the memorial of a different friend who died not long before, abruptly, too young, leaving a world, husbands, work, friends. I am sorry for your loss. I am sorry for your loss. I search the phrase in my inbox, looking for the date of yet another memorial, another gone. How many times, how often, how expected, who to blame, what proximity, what complicity, lover, friend, comrade, lover, stranger, comrade, neighborhood, city, stranger, neighborhood, hospital, country, stranger, comrade, friend. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for how I have contributed wittingly, unwittingly, uncomfortably. I'm so sorry for everything, Elena printed on 4x6 cards. They were white. We were young. I carried that white card in my bag for years. 8. Yesterday, the person who makes me the most confused about apology, you know, the one, you have one too, the one who has closed the circle that you compulsively leave cracked open, as if to leave open the possibility of crawling back in its embrace. Yesterday, the person who is, for me, the starkest example of that person appeared on the street and did that thing, the I've closed the circle without your help and you will never know the story I've locked inside thing. A sound escapes through the unclosed circle, a sound like oh, oh, oh. 9. I've heard that repair with a living person must sometimes be made as if they are dead, for instance, in cases where they won't return calls. But how does this work with a nation, a law? How does this work with a dead concept, a concept that never should never have been allowed to exist? How can this count as anything like repair, or even as reaching the limits of repair? How can this count at all? Earlier in this poem about risk, we discussed Anne Dufourmentel's concept of dying in the midst of living, a concept she means to invoke as a caution, a cautionary tale. The times I've felt closest to understanding, to experiencing the urge to die, are the times I have calculated that the number of apologies I owe has exceeded the time I have left to deliver them. Then shame appears, shame whose role is, paradoxically, to keep you alive, because shame is a punishment you must be alive to incur, to endure. To die is the easy way out, shame says. But what is the hard way out? If you know, please. 10. A list of relations. The relation between gossip and apology, how gossip can make you apologize for something you don't believe even occurred, to endorse an event the description of which you refute, to which you cannot in good conscience agree. The relation of apology to agreement. So much of the point of apologizing being to put to rest the discrepancy between 2 points of view, 2 sides of the story, to put to rest points, sides. So much of the point of apology is to get there where there is beyond the points, to get beyond together to a point of rest. Earlier, we talked about the importance of the mistake, but not all mistakes are important. Some are inconsequential, middling. Some are truly unnecessary. There is such a thing, I am told, as an unforced error. Is there such a thing as a victimless mistake? How to know, for that matter, when the apology fits the crime? And some apologies have nothing to do with mistakes. Some apologies are made as pure defense under duress or as cover, a buying of time to stave off consequences long enough to get away, or in more ambiguous cases, just long enough to determine whether an apology is deserved. This latter kind of apology as cover most often is given to the world's vampires of apology by the world's universal donors of apology. As defense, this tactic fails every time for the simple fact that an apology, like a pint of blood, can't be taken back. But who are we kidding? Most of the time, the problem with apology is not a question of its necessity. Most apologies are necessary, most of the time. The problem is one of execution, the question one of grace. 11. What is the question beneath the question? I'll ask students, anyone, as if question is answer and answer question. The questions in this poem mostly end without a mark, drop into empty space. Abyss, everywhere, abyss. How I translated a line from a language I couldn't, a language I wouldn't learn. The question is always the same: how to live with each other, with one another, how to live, how to learn to live and to leave the living without a mark, or more accurately, how to accept the mark you made. I mean, how to exchange the couldn'ts for wouldn'ts and live with the aftermath, to take account, the relation of apology to account. Somehow it has to end. Somehow we die. We are living our death every breath. We are living it now. 12. Before deciding it's time to let go of the poem, I use my opposable thumbs to type another text, an apology I'm not sure I mean. I don't send the text. I don't delete the text. I leave it hanging out in opposable, undecidable space. I check my signals and read an invitation to join a hunger strike proposed by the National Chapter of Faculty for Justice for Palestine. I accept the invitation. I eat the cookie someone drops in my lap for free. They are starving. It's too late. Being starved, still too passive, a construction, still too. I look down, my eyes fall on a passage in my book. The passage reads, resistance is never futile. A question begins to form in my mouth. I don't punctuate the question with a mark. I can't end the poem with a question or ask what a hunger or strike of anything might do. I can't end the poem with yet another, I'm sorry. I can only open my mouth. There are so many other things to say. I can only run in the direction of risk, take the hard way, abyss everywhere, and what if everyone? 13. And then there's the last part, which I haven't written yet. Thanks for listening.
Wow, it is force majeure city in here tonight. I have been bowled over more times. The egg, the math teacher, Anne de Formentel. What a reading we have just had. And you just heard Anna Moschovakis, who is on Instagram as at Good Utopian. Shout out to 10 Years of Bushel Collective, which Daniel and Anna are both founding members of. Bushel is a volunteer-based, collectively run storefront experiment in the Catskills town of Delhi, New York. So please consider Delhi, excuse me. Right, Delhi. Yeah, I really learned that in the moment of Daniel's reading. So thank you so much for doing constructivism in real time happening right now. And Anna, thank you so much, Allison, Daniel. This has been just a phenomenal and a beautiful, beautiful reading. I don't know what to say. I feel like I said right before we started recording, I was like, if you want to read some new shit, like please consider doing that. And then you were like, oh no, 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 no. Like I am already double barreled, ready to go with some incredible stuff. So again, thank you. I'm like out of saliva, words, etc. But by way of wrapping up, I just want to say thank you so much again to our marvelous readers for sharing their beautiful work with us tonight. This has been such a privilege. And thank you to our listeners, whether you're in the Zoom call with us right now or you're reading or you're listening in from YouTube in the future. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for finding some time for poetry amidst all of whatever is happening. We have another reading going on January 15th, which I hope that you might be able to join us for. And we always close Nightlight with a poem. And I'm going to go to my little camera photo reel thing. I learned about Daniel, who was instrumental in organizing this reading through the Pen Poetry series, which is a marvelous document of poetry of all stripes. I learned about a lot of great poets like Derek Gramadsky and Shane McCrae and a million others when I was a little baby poet. So I'm going to read a poem that was on the Pen Poetry series a number of years ago by a past Nightlight reader named Ben Mirov. Ben Mirov read in September. This poem is called Falconhood. How do you make the labyrinth fly? Become a mechanic of the soul. Is that a job anyone can have? Chucking a wrench at the glass heart? Master of fine art, more like paper airplane disaster factory. Gerard Manley Hopkins, more like a clod of earth flung skyward toward God's stupid face. Feathers or snow? I don't know. Forest or forget? I can't tell either. Just keep tracing circles in the air. Keep skywriting your revisions for everyone to read until the mission is complete and you return to the place you started. A light upon a gauntlet. Any gauntlet will do.